Hi, welcome to another episode of Shakti Panel RealTalk. This is where we talk about topics that are of a lot of interest to working people, things that are related to the self, to the team, and to the company, things that we don't really talk about all the time, but are critical to our success. Today's topic is executive presence. So now we have with us today Catherine Jones, who is a communication coach, who's going to tell us about executive presence. Catherine, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My first career was in radio, and I was doing virtual communication before we had a name for it, right? So now that everybody is doing everything virtually, I've found a lot of opportunity to work with people being better at being virtual. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today is how executive presence, not only how we manifest that in the real world, but how does that show up when people are looking at us on Zoom or Skype or Teams?
Makes sense, Catherine. You know, if you had not told me that you were in radio, I was going to ask you, are you in radio? Because you have a radio voice. You really do have a radio voice.
Well, what a coincidence. I had a 25-year career in radio. Yeah.
There you go. It all works out. So let's start with executive presence. What is it? It seems very mythical to me. So what exactly is it?
You know, people describe it all different ways. I'm going to suggest that the real key to it is right there in the language we use. It is about being present. So if I'm not present with people, a group, a meeting, a person, then I can't have executive presence. And I suppose when you talk about executive, people mean, are you able to run a meeting? Can you give people direction? Can you lead a team? That's what people are looking for. And some of that comes from learning strategy and so forth. But a lot of it comes from who you are and how you manifest in the world. So I believe executive presence can be learned or developed. Some people have naturally a very strong presence. I mean, you'll see even among children, there are kids that emerge as leaders in a scout troop or a classroom or a day camp, that they just naturally have some aura about them that makes people pay attention to them. And if we're born with that, we're really lucky. And if we're not, we can learn it.
That is good to know because that is going to be my next question. Is it a trait or is it a skill that we can learn? So as a communication coach, you have seen people with the trait and you have been able to coach people on that, I assume, right? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So here's I said a minute ago that the key is in the language. It's about being present. And when we look to develop more executive presence, that's where it starts. It's that I have to be right here, right now with you, whoever you are. And
Right.
if I'm not right here, right now with you, I can't possibly have executive presence. So that really comes from the body. People can't intellectualize their way to presence. So you want to go through a thing with me here?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Exercise? All right. So here's how you begin to develop that presence. You put your feet flat on the floor. I'm going to encourage everybody to do this with us. So put your
Okay.
feet flat on the floor. Notice that often, this is funny, Deepa, I have a cover photo on my Facebook page of my third grade Sunday school class. It was the day that we got Bibles with our names on them.
Okay.
And the boys are standing in two rows. The girls are sitting in a row in front of them, every one of us with our ankles crossed and our hands folded in our laps because we were
I
nice
had my
girls.
hands folded in my lap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, girls are taught that, right? We learn that at a very young age. And if you look at us, even as third grade girls, we're making ourselves small. We're constricting our energy,
hmm
diminutive or even submissive. And then the
hmm
boys are back there standing strong and tall. Huh. How about that?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
So all of that conditioning about cross your ankles, cross your knees, or wrap your feet around the legs of the chair, set all that aside, put both feet flat on the floor. When we work virtually, I like to do it barefoot because what the hell, nobody can see my tootsies.
Hey.
And I'm feeling the energy of the earth. I'm literally drawing the energy of the earth up into my body. So activate your legs, your calves and your thighs,
Mm-hmm.
and center your bottom on the chair. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we'll sit like this or off to one
Mm-hmm.
side, and immediately I have less of that aura of authority when I soften and make myself smaller. So
Uh-huh.
I want to sit squared off, straight back. My shoulders are back and down. You want to be expansive across your chest.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if I make myself small, I look, do you see the difference when you look at
Oh,
me like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want to take up as much space as I possibly can. And let me just address this. For women especially, taking up space can be a really loaded thing. I spent years trying to take up less space because
Uh-huh.
I felt too big, too much.
Right.
And so what I learned the hard way is doing this doesn't make me thin, right? It
Uh-huh.
makes me round and soft. Round and soft doesn't go with executive presence. So go ahead and take up all the space you possibly can.
Okay.
Because some of that is when we're willing to fully occupy our space, we look like we're in command of ourselves, if nothing else. And the chances are better that we might be in command of something else too. Your head is straight up and down on top of
Mm-hmm.
your body. And be in touch with the back of you. This is something that I've noticed, especially as we do virtual work, that we have a tendency to get really intent. I want these people at the other end of our communication to pay attention to me, to believe me,
Mm-hmm.
to learn something, to like me. And so I can start leaning in and forcing energy.
Mm-hmm.
That forcing is not
Mm-hmm.
magnetic. And it doesn't really
Uh-huh.
go with executive presence. You've known people, I'm sure, who are in charge of stuff, and it feels like they're always driving it like that.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
That is not a genuine executive presence. So here's a way to think about it, Deepa. Instead of a furnace
Mm-hmm.
blasting hot air at the screen, I want to be a radiator. So I give
Uh-huh.
off a warmth, an energy, and I attract people to it instead of forcing at them. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. It is, I can tell you when I'm having conversations, I'm like this
Yes.
all the time, completely, obviously, completely unintentionally. But when you and some of these things that you're saying with respect to the ground and the back and all of that, I mean, I teach yoga. So
I know you
I
know all
teach a
this.
lot of that in yoga, but I never thought of applying that to executive presence for myself,
Yes. So
which
if
is
you
crazy.
bring that yoga teaching
Uh-huh.
energy into a business meeting, I
Mm.
mean, not that you're going to sit here and go,
Right.
but
Mhm.
but you have some of that. It's all about the presence. And people who have a yoga practice or something, or a
Uh-huh.
meditation practice
Mhm.
even, have an advantage because
Mm.
that is also about being present.
Absolutely.
It's also
Huh.
about being relaxed, and
Yeah.
executive presence goes with a sense of comfortable relaxation, not sloppiness. I don't mean like we're taking a vacation, but
Right.
when the energy is too tense and too tight,
Mhm.
people don't feel good around us. They're not drawn to us. In
Mm.
fact, they're repelled, and they don't even know why, because states are contagious. If
Mhm.
I show up for a meeting, and especially if I'm the person in charge of the meeting, and
Yeah.
I bring tension or strain with me, other people start to pick that up. And they
Oh,
may not even be
absolutely.
consciously aware of it. It really goes on at the non-conscious level. But at
Mm.
some point, they're experiencing that energy. They're beginning to feel the same energy. And they leave a meeting feeling really great about what just happened or not.
Mm.
I'm sure you've been in conversations with people where you left feeling you couldn't really say what was off about it. It just doesn't feel right.
Oh, absolutely, Catherine. Actually, one thing that I had noticed very early in my career, and this is when I became a parent, was that, what the way I behaved is the way the kids would behave back to me. So the one
Sure.
thing that I realized early on is I have to be in charge of my presence or my emotions, so that if I want the kids to behave a certain way, and I realized that the same thing applies to my teams as well. I used to keep thinking, parenting and managing a team, there seems to be a
Yeah.
correlation here.
Yeah, very similar, very similar. And in both, you need to be in charge. You can be a little bit more obvious about being in
Mhm.
charge with your
Yeah,
kids. Probably you should be. But
right.
with a team as well, we need to have a sense of control. So I think about this as command of the room. And
Mm.
as I said, some of us are born with that,
Mhm.
but all of us can cultivate it. I want to speak a little bit about voice, Deepa, because this
Sure.
is a big piece of how people perceive executive presence. That relaxation that we went through, that being in touch with our body, sets the stage for a rich voice that has some depth to it and that sounds like executive presence. This doesn't sound like executive presence. When I talk up here in a higher register, a little
Mhm.
bit through my nose, it's kind of nasal, it's tinny, it's tight.
Mhm.
That is not the voice of a leader. Do you
Mm.
hear the difference when I
Oh,
talk in my
yeah.
natural voice? Very different. So, how do we get this voice? It's not that we have to go change the pitch of our voice. I mean, it can be done, but it's challenging and not worth
Are
it.
you sure, Catherine, that we cannot change?
Very nice. See, you just did. So here's what makes a difference. It's all about breath, and specifically about breathing from low in my belly. So
Mm.
do this with me too, everybody. So you want to breathe all the way from down here so you can feel your lower belly moving in and out. And don't worry, we can't see it, so nobody's watching. You want to feel that expansiveness all the way around your core. So, what happens often, and especially when we're tense or nervous, we start breathing shallowly. We move our chest and shoulders as we breathe. And then we don't get full breath supply to support a rich, full voice. And you get that more tinny, thin sound. So, a relaxed body, breathing from the belly. Now your voice comes up and out, and it's full and rich. And in a virtual environment, audio makes a huge difference. A video does too, but
Mhm.
honestly, the video experts will tell you if you have to pick, focus on audio quality because people will watch a picture that is, slightly pixelated or off center before they'll listen to bad audio. So it's worth, if you're going to do a lot of virtual work, it's worth investing in a mic that's not the built-in mic in your computer because they just don't have the same sound. They don't give your voice the range that you naturally have. And then a voice that bespeaks executive presence is, at least in the United States, a lower voice.
Mhm.
And why would that be? Because men have lower voices than women,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
historically, who was in charge of things? Men. And
Yeah.
there's tons of research about how we associate a lower voice with strength, dominance, being in charge. Now, that doesn't mean we all have to speak like men. We couldn't if we wanted to. But it
Right.
does mean that we want to fully use the lower end of our natural range and then use the higher notes for emphasis and then come
Got
back.
it.
Yeah? Nicely done. So we get in the habit, if we get stuck up here, which often happens because we're tense in our throat and our jaw, we get
Mhm.
stuck in that higher range and then there's that uncomfortable energy and it just doesn't have the same sound. So all that relaxing we did earlier is going to make a huge difference in terms of how you sound. And especially people carry a lot of tension right here in the jaw, around the lips. And so you want to begin to practice letting all of that go.
Huh, I had no idea. I had no idea, Catherine, that all this is what went into the whole executive presence. I was thinking it was a little bit more of, honestly, I didn't even know what it was, but
Yeah.
I did not expect, um, it's sounding so much like mindfulness and
Yeah.
yoga,
Well,
absolutely.
yes. And what's the good news about that is the things that we're talking about are things anybody can do.
Mm.
It takes some practice because
Hmm.
it may be a shift away from long held habits, but it's very doable. And this is really, it's the physical skill that adds up to executive presence. Now, of course, executive presence also means we know, we know our field, we know our business, We understand how to have conversations with clients. We have a strategy. I mean, there's certainly other things that are elements of it. And I would argue that some of those things are harder and take longer to develop. Whereas learning to fully occupy my space, get comfortable being seen, and project my voice in a richer, fuller way, those are not so hard to learn. And when we begin with that, we see a difference in how people react to us. So
Oh, absolutely.
one thing I wanted to add is I am not, as much as I've talked about occupying your space and filling your body with energy, I'm not talking about throwing your weight around or being dominating or bossy. And as we think about commanding a room and connecting with the individuals, some of us are naturally more adept at commanding a room. And some of us are really naturally gifted at connecting with people. Most of us are better at one than the other. And real executive presence means we want to do a dance between them. We want to have both of those at our disposal. And we want to seamlessly move between them as the situation demands. So for me, that meant really focusing on how do I connect with people better? Because command comes pretty easily for me. See, you're shocked, aren't you? When I first started as an independent business person, going to networking meetings, Chamber of Commerce meetings, that sort of thing, people actually told me, when I first met you, I was a little bit intimidated, but then it turned out you were a lot nicer than I thought you were. I mean, I heard that kind of thing more than once, especially from small women. So isn't that interesting, right? People who maybe didn't feel that they were really strong and present felt easily bulldozed by somebody like me. And that certainly was never my intent. So what that told me was I needed more balance. So without giving up that sense of being in command when it's called for, how do I warm things up? And this is an element of executive presence too. It's sort of the flip side of what we've been talking about. So a couple of things. Are you interested? A couple of things.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Warm it up. Okay.
Yes.
So part of it is really thinking of yourself as speaking to a person, not to a room, not declaiming or intoning, but actually being conversational, talking to a person. And we talked about this earlier, Deepa, that on a virtual platform, what that means is talking through the camera. And I think about it as through, not to the camera.
Yeah.
A lot of people say to me, I hate talking to the screen. I don't know. It feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. So here's a way to think about that. Instead of thinking of talking to the camera, think through the camera. And imagine the person you're talking to right on the other side. So the camera is just the conduit that gets your voice to their ears and vice versa, or your face to their eyes and vice versa. A good analogy would be a phone call. If you watch this conversation and then you wanted to call your friend and say, boy, this was really interesting. You got to check out what Deepa did this week. You wouldn't think of yourself as calling the phone.
Oh, no. Yeah.
You would call the friend.
Person. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. The phone is just the vehicle that enables the communication. Camera is the same thing. So whatever thought you might have had of talking to a camera, set that aside. That's one thing. Using people's names is magical for warming things up. Everybody's favorite word is their own name. And absent that, the word you. One of the best things I ever read, Deepa, was a book about business writing. And it said, everything you write should begin with the word you. It felt a little artificial, but I started playing around with that. And he was right. It changes everything. So when we start off talking about what I want, what I think, what I recommend, your mother's interested in that. Your best friend's interested in that. But the rest of the world, they're way more interested in them than they are in me. So if you can shift things around so you really keep the focus on the person or the people you're talking to. That changes everything. And while that might sound not strong, it actually conveys real strength.
Interesting. I mean, you talked about strength, you talked about warmth, you talked about presence. The one question that I have for you, Catherine, is Catherine, is that especially now America is it's a divided country at this point of time, right? And it is hard to have any conversation about any topic without actually getting into politics and this divisiveness. So as a person with this newfound executive presence, how do you navigate these conversations so that, again, it doesn't get into that upper body fight or flight kind of mode versus how can you calmly have a conversation? Any advice for us on that?
Well, part of it is about the physicality. So are my feet on the floor? Am I breathing? Do I find myself, what we were talking about earlier, when somebody's got me aggravated, I'm really inclined to start leaning in and getting really intense. And you can hear when I do that, you can hear this shift in my voice just because of the tightness here. So if I can stay relaxed in my body, stay in touch with the back of me, and stay in my space, then I can also own my opinion without the suggestion that it has to be yours too, or you're an inferior human being. This is how I feel about it. And I stop there. There's also a thing about timing. People feel bludgeoned when we repeat ourselves over and over. And often we do that because we just don't know when to stop. And we're passionate about a topic and we keep going and we want to be clear and we're not sure they understood. So we say it again in slightly different words, but none of that is useful because they got it the first time. And my words actually have more weight when there are fewer of them.
This is so interesting. I mean, you're absolutely right. We do repeat ourselves. I find myself doing that all the time. Again, you're right. It's also because, you don't know when to stop. And I think that's the whole confidence, knowing that I said my piece and that's enough. They got it. Versus being insecure about, right?
It's also being comfortable with silence. People talk all the time, Deepa, about that awkward pause. I don't get it. Why does a pause have to be awkward? A pause is very powerful. And so if you can get comfortable with that moment of silence, then you can stop. Part of the reason we keep talking is because we don't want silence. And so we just keep filling the silence and we kind of say what we've already said. So one clue is if you hear yourself saying, so again, you didn't actually need to say that again. We got it the first time.
Gotcha.
And
why
then
is that?
Stop.
Why is that? I'm sorry, Catherine. Why is that? Why are people uncomfortable with silence? Do you know why?
Because when we're quiet, we feel seen. In a way, we feel heard when we're not speaking. So it's as if I have to keep filling it up, because if there's a moment of silence, there's something real between you and me. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that. So people tend to fill silence with repeating themselves or language, non-words, filler language, like, so, okay, basically, essentially, that kind of rigmarole. And so it takes practice. I've worked with clients on this, where the exercise is this: say what you have to say, put your lips together and sense your lips touching. Like actually get a sensation there. And then talk some more. Or better yet, ask a question and allow the other person to talk.
So you do coach a lot of leaders in companies, I assume. For executive presence and communication.
Yep. Communication skills, presentation, and a lot of it, as we've discussed here, has to do with listening as much as talking. I used to be a talk show host. I always said it should be called a listen show, because the listening is the hard part. Talking, anybody can do that. Can I stop and listen? and then
Gotcha.
make something of that, you know, have a dialogue with somebody. That's where the challenge is.
Mm. This has been so insightful, Catherine. I know you
I'm so
for a
glad.
few months, but I had honestly no idea about the depth of your, the rest part of it is that innate talent. I think you are one of those people who are born with it, and plus your ability to coach people, which makes it, uh, which helps you impart your knowledge to other people as well. Now I'm going to stop talking before I repeat myself.
Good work,
And lean
Deepa.
back.
Yeah, excellent. And that is so, when I watch you like that, it's so warm and magnetic. Yeah, really good.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Catherine,
It is
John.
my pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. This was the episode of Shakti Panel Real Talk. Catherine Johns and Executive Presence. See you all.